So here's what's happening in our water and our food. And this is because there is no regulation when it comes to corporate special interests, particularly as it relates to big oil, because that's where plastic comes from.
Lexi.
Oh, wow. That's all plastic pellets in there. Plastic pellet, plastic pellet, plastic pellet. Microplastics have shown up in the blood, brains, and testicles of nearly every human tested.
Microplastics.
Microplastics are everywhere.
They've been found in almost every organ in the body.
We're eating and drinking more plastic than we might have realized.
And you might be likely to blame your own personal behavior for this junk ending up in your body.
Swap out that plastic cutting board.
Plastic is being leached into my coffee.
But it's not all from your cutting board or water bottle.
Plants like this one are producing a form of microplastics that are relatively unknown and nearly completely unregulated.
The problem is once they get outside the fence line, they get into the waterway, things can eat them because they look like fish eggs. They absorb the harmful chemicals like PCBs and PAHs, and those are the things that make them hazardous once they're in the environment. Lots of plastic.
The bottles are made using a chemical called acrylonitrile, which studies at the time.
Okay, can we first say that if, it's kind of like reading the label. One of the mistakes that we have made for many, many years that I think is starting to change now is we are starting to read the labels on our food and drink products. And what you'll notice, I haven't drank soda in decades, but if there's one thing I think we can all agree.
It cleans rust.
That's what's amazing. Have you seen have you seen the power, no joke, of what Coca-Cola is capable of doing?
Well, does anybody question why things are given names like that? Do you wonder why things are given names like that?
We know they used to put cocaine in it.
But let's say people are reading the ingredients and you're reading your ingredients. Nobody knows what that is. People read the list and they don't recognize at least 50% of the words. So what difference does it make if you don't know what any of these things are? And I have no idea what that is, but I know I don't want it in my food.
Correct.
So, but I don't want anything in my food other than what is the food.
One of the best things that we did when Jen ran for Congress was we built 2 community gardens. And I highly recommend that if you are not currently involved with a community garden, that you look into a community garden, because that is one of the best things that you could do at the local level. Imagine being able to grow your own fruits and vegetables. Imagine not having to worry about what goes in your food. We do have to get back to the days of being able to do a lot of things on our own. And this is a much bigger problem. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of these things are much easier in the red rural parts of the United States, because people actually have to work with their hands. Very often in a lot of the bluescapes, urban and suburban districts of the United States, a lot of people are not into this stuff or don't do this stuff. And they're heavily reliant on the Publixes and the Trader Joe's of the world to be trusting in what is actually going into their products. But what is there to trust?
But apparently somebody recently went through a Whole Foods, and now and the truth, I haven't been really shopped at a Whole Foods since Amazon bought Whole Foods, but apparently now they have tons of modified ingredients in all their products, whereas one of the whole things about Whole Foods was they didn't have that. So
Kat's 100% correct. You shouldn't be eating anything of its ingredients you don't understand. And the one thing I'm guilty of every once in a while is, yes, I do want I know you hate me for this, but I do like the occasional Cheetos or, Dorito. I know you do with the cheese, the nacho cheese.
No, for me, I don't like, and I don't like any orange food, and I don't like any food that gets anything on my fingers. And then Cheetos and Doritos get your fingers orange, and then it gets on the countertops and it gets on all the stuff. I don't like orange food. The only time my kids were ever allowed orange foods is if they were at someone else's birthday party that had those things. I would let them indulge, but none of that crap ever came into my house.
All right, Frosty, I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't support Dr. Shiva, but let's just say that we did an interview with him a number of months back. You can find it in our archive. I recommend you go take a look.
Oh, he's a piece of work.
Yeah, he's interesting.
He's a special piece of work.
We'll continue.
Time showed did not leak significant particles into the beverage inside, which is important because acrylonitrile is a carcinogen when consumed.
Only from your Coca-Cola bottler.
Just 2 years after the test run launched, the FDA rescinded approval. The amount of migration of particles from bottle to contents wasn't safe. the bottle was banned.
I like it very much. I have a youngster 5, and I feel safe that he has the Coke in the plastic bottle.
Why do you feel safe?
Because glass is breakable. So we were always taught to be scared of breaking glass. And as somebody who is a very avid cannabis user and a water pipe aficionado, I will say that glass is the best way to go.
Oh, absolutely.
And so for me, I understand like the idea of, also when you have kids that you don't want them to be having glass. I get that. You don't want a kid running around with every parent that I know had plastic cups for their kids when their kids were little. We all did it.
Afimi Wunawan. It's called More Perfect Union. And Sean Morrow has been a guest on our podcast. I highly recommend that.
It isn't, this documentary, I don't know what the name of it is, but if you go to the More Perfect Union channel, they put out stuff like this regularly. It's really good.
Thank you, Teresa. And yes, we appreciate Brianna having on Fidel. He's been on our show multiple
You know what?
times.
He hasn't been on in a long time because...
No, but we could reach out to him. Apparently, he was talking about degrowth with Brianna today.
Okay,
so
because, we basically what happened was we've adopted Steve as our MMT person. And so we don't often have other MMT people on. But we should. We haven't had him on in a long time.
We could do that. All right, keep going.
The FDA approved the safety of acrylonitrile bottles using testing data from Monsanto, who made the bottles.
You keep
The
stopping
FDA did no testing of their own during the approval process.
So when we talk about the difference between the two major political parties, there are differences, but they're on the margins. And yes, those margins in a number of instances matter. The Democratic Party generally is better on public education than the Republicans are. The Democratic Party is generally better on abortion than Republicans are. But when it comes to the foundational issues in our country, the idea that the approval of the Food and Drug Administration, which may be the most corrupt organization in all of government at this point.
It's just they're
approved by Monsanto. Monsanto, which is probably responsible for tens of millions of people being poisoned to death. That's it. I mean, come on now.
What?
This is the issue.
Well,
and they are in bed with both major parties.
Consumers were basically victimized by the concept of, because you're given a product and you're told, okay, this is lightweight, it's not breakable, like your kids can carry it around, it's just you don't have to worry about broken glass. And so consumers just expect that products have been deemed safe. And that especially back when we came out with plastic bottles. But once we know better, and yet they continue to do it, that's when it becomes really nefarious. But interestingly, when you go back and look at all of these things, the people who did them, they knew all along. It's only the regular people that didn't know all along. The people on top knew that this was bad all the way along. We didn't. I didn't know that.
No, but sometimes your body just, the other thing that a lot of people don't do, which I've always found very interesting. There was a time where I can remember that I ate a certain type of what ultimately was processed cheese. And it affected my ability to go to the bathroom.
That's gross. Processed cheese.
Could you imagine continuing to do, because I've heard of many people, and listen, South Park has done a great job of lampooning issues like that, where
good grief.
You know you're ingesting something that isn't good for you and your body is telling you to stop doing it, and you keep doing it anyway.
Okay, now as somebody, I would argue that is dairy in general. We're not supposed to be eating dairy, and I know that I do eat cheese, but
one-third of the planet is
ideal.
lactose intolerant. And that doesn't necessarily stop a lot of people.
I don't think they are. I don't think that's what it is. I think that we call it that, but what it really is it's just not something we're supposed to be eating.
Fair enough.
Obviously, bottles don't use acrylonitrile plastic anymore, but the Koch Monsanto story shows how the chemical industry manipulates facts and regulators to push things that we don't fully understand yet out into the world as quickly as possible. From 1950 to today, plastic production went from 2 million tons a year to 450 million tons. Along the way, we see something familiar pop up. In a 1965 congressional hearing, a mention of the waterway between Connecticut and Massachusetts, about where the Monsanto plastic plant was. strange plastic pellets emerging in the water. Big spills do happen, like all the time. But the persistent problem isn't some big accident that would make the news, but just putting these things out as regular standard operating procedure, part of their daily routine. Chase's Nerdle Patrol puts out a map that shows where citizen researchers are finding this stuff, and it really illuminates how it's happening.
Yeah, so what we have found over the years of collecting this data is there's a close correlation with where plastic is manufactured to where the higher concentrations are.
You also see higher concentrations around train tracks. Nurdles are transported by train, and they just fall off along the route. Congress may finally be doing something. The Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act was introduced to Congress in early 2024 to address the lack of EPA and state regulation on nurdles. But the plastic industry's been pushing back hard, citing the Do Nothing Clean Sweep program as evidence the regulatory changes are unnecessary. And it's important to remember it didn't have to be this way. This is all about profit. Keeping these particles out of our waterways would cost these companies more money. Pumping out more and more plastic products is profitable. But is any of that savings getting passed on to you, or only the chemicals that are poisoning you? Even back to the Coke bottle. They pushed the bottle out quickly to test the environmental and health effects on real people.
I mean, they know, I mean, we're guinea pigs for that. Also, interestingly, something that I know from when I was growing up, definitely there are parts of this country, and this is sort of like that eco side, environmental injustice, places like Flint, places like East Palestine, but there are places where there are such large concentrations of cancer, like these cancer cluster places, and they are very often in conjunction with things like this. So, for example, the tract of land between New Orleans and Baton Rouge at one point had like the highest per capita cancer rate in the country. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this is basically where the Mississippi River ends. So it is collecting all of the crap from all the way up and bringing it all the way. And those are the places where people get the sickest, where you have the most of that toxic crap in your water.
There's a lot of things that we can do to deal with this problem. There's
Banning plastic straws is not the answer.
That's not the answer. You know, and to me, it also speaks to this issue. When you think about what we just went through, and thankfully, you know, Hurricane Milton was not as devastating. It was still horrific.
Not for us. Not for us.
We say this all the time because of what we've done to the environment, and big oil being the most guilty party. We're now at a point where we're playing Russian roulette with Mother Nature every year. There is no way to avoid this now. It's been set in motion. And one of the biggest problems that people in the chat and just people in general can't accept is that once you become an arm of the Democratic Party establishment, which is bought and paid for by corporate special interests, you will eventually succumb to the will of big oil, which is what the party has, and they've done for a long time. You know, one thing we didn't get into with Professor Ware, and I would use this as a talking point if I'm on the trail, is to just talk about how neoliberalism, led by Reagan and Clinton, has brought our country to the point that it's at now.
That's what people, well, I think that it's very under discussed that neoliberalism is a very bipartisan situation.